President Trump also took the time today to attack NATO allies, calling them cowards.
Sam Cooper sounding the alarm. Welcome back to Moose on Loose. My name's David. Today we've got Sam Cooper dropping a bombshell here that China is trying to entice corrupt chiefs in Canada. Yeah, this is happening. We've got a bunch of updates here coming from Iran. Some more stuff here in Canada. Let's jump into this. Starting this episode off, we've got Table Salt posting this. Canada's happiness decline since 2012 is one of the worst in the entire world, down to just 0.73 out of 10. I'm not surprised because, well, the Liberals have been in power for the past 10 years. And we're only being dethroned by these African countries that have no resources, no technology, and a whole lot of corruption. As he mentions, it was worse than Ethiopia, Yemen, and Ghana. Moving ahead, we've got Barbara Ball posting this. Taxpayer information traffic. A CRA employee, Yoan Zola, 35, has been charged with trafficking taxpayer information. CRA deserves credit. They spotted it. They reported it back in March 2022. Why did it take nearly 4 years to lay charges? This is taxpayer data, sensitive personal info. Who was this information trafficked to? That's the question. Where is this getting sent to? Who's getting this information? What are they doing with it? Somebody's paying for this or incentivizing someone to do this. And why did it take 4 years to lay charges? If that's not bad enough, we've got this story here. Border officer charged after truck full of opium, green Luigi, and tobacco crosses into Ontario. Now, what's especially bizarre about this story, CBSA officer is facing several charges after he allegedly allowed a transport truck filled with millions of dollars of all that stuff that I mentioned there into the Niagara region. It says on March 6th, the RCMP said the CBSA officer identified as Daniel Notarini and the driver identified as Abhishek were charged with conspiracy to import Schedule 1 substance, trafficking a controlled substance, importation, etc., etc. Now, what's very bizarre about this situation, Daniel Notarini, we can see here from the Governor General of Canada website, received a medal, a Peace Officer Exemplary Service Medal back in October 22nd, 2025. And here he is 3 months later getting charged after a truck full of all this stuff crosses into Ontario. It's time to go through all the government agencies and arrest the criminals. And if it isn't criminals at the CBSA, we have liars at the top of the government like Mark Carney. This one coming from Blacklock's reporter. Privy Council disclosed PM misled media about private conversations with China president. Human rights and foreign interference were not brought up proactively by Mark Carney. This is embarrassing. This guy continually humiliates Canada. As Blacklock's dug up here, they asked this question, topics on human rights and foreign interference were not brought up proactively by the Canadian Prime Minister. This is the official response they got from the government. Meanwhile, what did Carney say in China?
On human rights with the president, yes, we did discuss human rights.
See, anytime he wants to try to hide something, he puts it in French, because then they go into English here and he doesn't mention human rights again.
Thanks. Maria Chang from Reuters. Just for a follow-up.
So they go on to all that, and then he goes on to talk about Jimmy Lai. He doesn't use the word human rights again.
A couple of things. One is with respect to Mr. Lai, Canada.
This guy should not be prime minister. And with that, we've got a journalist here, Dan Knight, posting this. So let's get this straight. Mr. Carney stood in front of cameras and assured Canadians he raised human rights and foreign interference with Beijing, said it plainly, repeatedly, confidently, and now his own government quietly admits he didn't. It's almost impressive the speed of which clear-eyed turned into carefully avoided. Canadians get the speeches about democracy, climate change, and human rights. Beijing gets the silence, the deals, and the smiles, and somehow we're all expected to pretend those two versions of reality didn't exist at the same time. There should be a way for us to hold a referendum to throw him out of power. The conflicts of interest, lying to Canadians, it should just be immediate termination of Prime Minister, go to an election, get this guy out of here. Moving ahead, we got the Reclamaire posting this, 17.2 million over 2 years for podcasts. That's right, we've got the Government of Canada invests to support Indigenous stories through broadcasting. You'll notice they're spending a lot of money on broadcasting here, which ties in with the next story here. So it says Indigenous peoples are the guardians of their stories. Support the Indigenous broadcasting in the North. You notice, in the North, we're not talking in Newfoundland, because this all wraps together, is essential tool for empowering and telling stories, yada yada. $17 million. You know, this also wraps in with Laurie Udlut getting tons of money for her region after crossing the Florida Carney's team. And people are pointing this out here. Odd that the two on the list from Iqaluit and you are getting over 1 million each, 3.6 million combined annually, and they're in the same firm with the same address in Ottawa. You can't make this stuff up. Inuit Broadcasting Corporation. Corruption is wild. And we've got Mark Miller posting this. We're investing in 23 Indigenous radio and broadcasting stations, 5 languages, revitalized initiatives. So Northern voices, Northern cultures and stories reach communities, etc., etc. So doing their thing there, big greasy grin on his face. There it is, more photo ops, more laughs, more smiles. Meanwhile, China's special envoy meets Iranian ambassador. China's special envoy for the Middle East met with Iranian ambassador in Beijing, Iranian Students News Agency reported on Saturday. The two officials discussed the current crisis in the Middle East following joint U.S.-Israel attack on Iran. China and Iran trying to figure this out. We've got all this First Nation journalism spending in the north, and then we've got this. So Nadine Wellwood dropping this podcast here with Sam Cooper, where he's dropping truth bombs of how China is trying to entice chiefs in the north to essentially create a weak spot in our country. As Harman Bangu says, China is targeting Indigenous leaders in the north, offering trips, partnerships, and access tied to critical minerals and strategic territory. British Columbians don't want foreign governments anywhere near our land or resources.
There are First Nations jurisdictions that are very well run and with honorable leaders, and there are a number, I think, because of jurisdictional gaps, sometimes political reticence on the part of Canadian governments to get involved in criticisms across, those sensitive jurisdictional issues or areas that, look, my own reporting based on leaked Canadian intelligence documents has said China is targeting First Nations jurisdictions and chiefs in the north, especially with intelligence operations, where they are inviting chiefs that they believe can be fooled or corrupted over to Beijing, on false pretenses. And they're running operations essentially to corrupt them and to gain access to Canadian critical minerals or resources. So this is a major concern in the north. My reporting for the Bureau has, as you recognize, has looked at that issue a number of times over the past few years. And we just had that confirmed in parliamentary hearings, I believe, over the past week. The CSIS Canadian intelligence executives confirmed their top concern, the threat to the north and to the Arctic. The number one threat is China. So you won't have Prime Minister Carney or Foreign Minister Anita Anand saying China's name in the north anymore.
We've seen that recently. Carney will not say anything bad about China, will not attach that, just says Russia. Russia's the threat up there. No mention of China anymore.
We'll hear Mark Carney talking about how Canada and China share a lot of alignment around issues like Greenland. But the reality is China is a huge threat in our north.
The Sam brings up there, they're trying to get access to minerals. And if First Nations have more power over more land, then they have more to offer China. So if they can corrupt these chiefs, they could get access to all those critical minerals. And I mean, even just going 4 or 5 days ago when I was talking about the land seizures, land title, fee simple title, all this stuff that's going on, deals being signed over, Musqueam Nation, First Nations in British Columbia, and saying, well, is this a way to tank the real estate prices so China can come in and start buying things up at bottom barrel prices? It's destabilizing the entire region. Lauren Gunter here of Toronto Sun mentioning this.
So why do you say, how come you're so worried that this is going to go after private property in the other 9 provinces? Does it really take that much imagination to think that a judge could say, the federal government hasn't really lived up to its part of the treaties. It hasn't upheld its end of the treaties. So therefore, I'm going to declare the treaties invalid and give Aboriginal title to First Nations.
And are we going to get a destabilization across Canada? China comes in, starts buying things up. Is Carney working with China, destabilizing things, making things bad for us, making things good for them, securing more power through not only the location, but is the businesses, the minerals in our country? There's a bigger plot going on here. You can check out the full podcast here on Nadine's channel. And what's shocking about this is this came out a month ago. Nobody's talking about this. Someone in the comments shared this, preparing Indigenous groups to take on the China market. This is coming from the Canada-China Business Council. The same Canada-China Business Council wrapped up in the United Front Work Department over here, and the same one that Mark Carney gave $12,000 to just back in October 24th, 2025. Several factors, including rapid growth in Indigenous entrepreneurship, increased Indigenous control over lands and resources, creates the potential for significant growth in Indigenous business activity. It's almost like they're telling us what they're going to do here. Start seizing taxpayers' land. Start making deals with China. Despite the size of the Chinese market and potential demand for indigenous products and services, indigenous businesses have only engaged with China in a limited fashion. The potential for business development between China and indigenous Canadians is immense. The indigenous communities are interested in developing business relationships with China, as illustrated by numerous trade missions between indigenous businesses and China in recent years. Okay, so moving ahead here, we got some updates on what's going over in Iran. We've got Tehran rocked by 3 new blasts, at least 3 new explosions heard in eastern Tehran overnight. We have U.S.-Israel strike Iran's Natanz nuclear site. The Atomic Energy Organization of Iran later said no radioactive material leaked by nearby residents are not in danger, which is good. We have Russia condemns strike on Iran's nuclear site. I don't think Russia's in the position to condemn anyone, considering they have a 4+ year conflict that's been going on. We've got U.S. military claims Iran's Hormuz threat is degraded, says after strikes on an underground site storing cruise missiles and other weapons, so they're taking out all their pow-pows, stated that Iran's capacity to challenge navigation in the area is now weakened and emphasized U.S. operations against such targets will continue. Iran has lost significant combat capabilities over the last 3 weeks. We're also seeing Iran vows unprecedented response if Karag Island attacked. So Karag Island is their oil island. It's all their infrastructure there, heavily fortified, says senior military official told Iran's Tasnim News on Saturday that the United States can expect unprecedented attack. Insecurity in other straits, including Bab al-Mandab Strait and Red Sea, is one of the options facing resistance front. The situation of the Americas will become more complicated than it is today. And finally, we've got IDF claims striking IRGC missile production sites. Israeli Defense Forces claimed they had struck several important ballistic missile production sites in Tehran. This is through a widespread overnight strike, claiming destruction of dozens of targets of the IRGC, of the Iranian terror regime. And with that, we've got Trump pissed off that NATO hasn't backed him, asking for minesweepers.
Let's now invite military, national security, and terrorism expert Christian Lupret in this conversation. Christian, good evening and thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Your take on President Donald Trump's latest post on Truth Social. He lists out 5 objectives, saying that the U.S. is close to meeting those objectives and saying that they are considering winding down those operations in Iran. What do you make of that?
Well, I think he's never really clearly articulated the ends of the military mission. And so now I think he's drawing red lines in the sand and providing an opportunity for Iran to step back from the confrontation on saying, basically implicitly signaling that for now the regime is going to stick to those red lines, and in return the U.S. sort of will pare back its confrontation, at least the military part of this confrontation. And of course, it leaves open the option for the U.S. to re-engage in military action should Iran cross any of those red lines. So the president obviously believes that he has achieved enough in terms of deterrence and containment of Iran along those 5 points that he outlines.
And this comes at a time, Christian, when the U.S. is actually sending in more warships, also more Marines in that region, and Iran is also threatening to widen the war with no restraint. How does really considering winding up add up at this time?
So this is what's known as the escalation ladder. So you need to be able to demonstrate that if your adversary escalates, you're prepared to escalate. But Trump is also offering the regime an opportunity to de-escalate. And so, but the de-escalation wouldn't be credible if Trump couldn't at the same time demonstrate that he's prepared to escalate further if the regime decides not to meet his demands and the regime possibly decides to escalate further, including possibly targeting some extremely sensitive religious sites in the region that could result in a massive regional conflagration.
We've seen, Christian, in the past.
Yeah, I don't think Iran is in the position to further escalate. I mean, they've had their entire navy wiped out, as well as their air force.
Last few weeks that several of the Gulf nations have also come under attacks. Oil refineries have been hit, for example. Some important buildings have been hit. Civilians have died. But the question is, for how long do you think these nations will continue to be in this defensive mode?
I think this is probably the biggest concern for the U.S. now, that if Iran really escalates, more of the coalition Asian countries in the region, the partner countries, might get into the fight. And we've already seen that there's serious coordination issues between Israel and the United States. So Israel having hit first the oil installations around Tehran that cost the United States a huge amount of goodwill among the Iranian population. And now, of course, infamously, the natural gas field in Iran. And so this is sort of if you have more countries get into this, you can imagine this will only exponentially increase the collective action problems. And it also means the US would lose control over the ability to de-escalate. So this might be one of the reasons why the president is providing an off-ramp.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And what's happening here is obviously Israel is in the region, so they have to deal with this on a daily basis where America is far away. So Israel is trying to strike these targets like the oil, the gas, the nuclear to protect themselves by sending Iran further back into the Stone Age. Donald Trump doesn't want that. He wants the people of Iran to live a free and prosperous life. He wants a new government in place where Israel's taking more of a stance of, we're just going to send you back 10, 15, 20 years so you can't come after us anymore. Obviously, those two strategies don't work at the same time.
President Trump also took the time today to attack NATO allies, calling them cowards for not pitching in, especially when it comes to securing the Strait of Hormuz. Your take on this sort of language and attack on NATO allies?
Yeah, I worry. This is 2003 and sort of Iraq sort of all over again. And I think this is going to result in an even bigger rift between European allies in particular and the United States. Now, it will not be the end of NATO, but I think it will mean the United States will step even further back from NATO and that European allies will be even more on their own. And that means Canada will need to do even more to make sure the alliance stays together in terms of leveraging its defense investments and other critical minerals and energy sort of supplies. So this is going to have long-term ramification for the alliance.
Canada's not going to be doing anything more. Carney didn't even acknowledge that we were attacked by Iran. Carney will only do whatever benefits himself.